This is On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. We are entrepreneurs of thought who wrestle with ideas and look for underlying connections. Join us as we think again about faith, politics, culture, and relationships. We're convinced that what we believe will make our lives better. All right, Mike, you
What
have
we
a story.
believe as
Something
all people,
funny that
not
happened to
necessarily
you.
what you and I believe makes everybody's life better, but what we believe as people, right?
Well,
That's
if
what
you
meant.
believe the truth,
Yeah,
it makes your
yeah,
life better.
that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I had an interesting thing happen the other day. I ate Taco Bell, which I eat much less Taco Bell than I ever used to. But anyway, I got a receipt. Look down. Why is it $1? I got a senior discount. I'm 53 years old. My first
Wait,
senior
when does
discount.
senior discounts
I think
officially
the
kick
youngest
in?
is 55 is when
55.
it starts. Yeah, but that's not all places.
Okay.
But there's some 55 years old, right? I mean, it's good business to give a senior discount, so you get asked and whatnot. But I have been asked before, thrift store or whatever, but I was given it, not asked. We had a good rapport, the young man, and it kind of slapped me with a little, I almost started giggling with a little bit of uncontrollableness. I was a little surprised,
Yeah.
and I was then sobered as well. It's like, I am getting older. There's just no, and so it has stayed with me for a couple days. It's been, and I've shared it with people, and my family especially. But and then I started thinking, what's the OST on this? The on second thought. What's the deeper? What's the
OST.
deeper?
Okay.
And the deeper thing is, we are all getting older. We just don't realize it, and there comes a point when you can't not realize it. And it is there is an element of submitting to God in this whole process. You either submit to God and embrace something that's happening, or you're going to be fighting it. And there's lots of ways to fight it, and some are probably okay, but some are really vain. Or
Okay, so when I'm younger, I want to get older.
I know. So
So in that way, it feels like I'm resisting where I'm at.
I know it's a flip flop. The same happens with getting carded for ID. You're offended when you're 23. What do you mean I don't look 21? When you're 33, you start to feel complimented.
Right.
Right? And when you're younger, to be viewed as older, oh yeah, that's good. But now 53, it's like, wow, that's sobering.
So do you have? I associate people's struggle with their aging process. I associate it with the desire to have strange names for grandma and grandpa. Should you become such? Like,
Yes.
do you have different names, or are you
So,
accepting of?
Did we tell you that our oldest is expecting our first grandkid?
Oh, that's
coming?
right. Yeah.
So we've been asked this now because we have some in our family, but I'm no. I mean, grandpa is fine with me.
Okay.
I don't have any.
You have.
I could care less. But no, actually, that's not true. I don't want things like Poppy or Poo Poo or Pee Pee or whatever the different P options are. And my wife does not necessarily want Nana or any of the other ones, but that is a funny thing. It's
Yeah.
it's a defiant, and partly it's not a bad thing because maybe in some respects, we weren't made to get old, right?
Yeah.
I'll share this another time.
How
but I
old
had
will
an
we be
original-
when we're in heaven?
Okay, that is a great question, by the way. I know we're doing exactly what we said we shouldn't do on our on-ramp topics.
Oh, I know.
is
We
get
wander
totally derailed.
around.
But you know what? I have a theory about that. And I
Yeah.
think it is between 18 and 28.
18 and 28.
Because for
is this
us...
based on the Heaven is for Real book?
No, it isn't. But
Okay.
it's based on certain dynamics that come into play there. Those are our peak.
Mm-hmm.
Our memories go back to late teens.
Okay.
There are most free... I mean, there's a lot of problems with those ages, but they are the pinnacle of a lot of things that I think can project into a heaven perspective that are virtuous.
I think my sense of self was really solid. Like when you think of
When?
me, like in college.
Okay.
It was when I stopped sort of questioning who am I and sort of realized this is me, and I kind of moved forward with it.
See, I didn't have that in college. It's probably later than that. I didn't feel like an adult till I was in my 30s. At some
Yeah.
point, I wake up and realize, oh, I'm not a kid.
Well, I didn't feel
feel
like an
like a
adult
kid.
either, but that felt like a different thing.
I agree, but it's still a part of it.
No, it is, yeah.
This sense of who I am and not being comfortable and discovering, and so. But the loggers used to say that 28 was their peak physical strength. 28 to 32, those
Yeah.
years. That's when they were, as males, the most peak form.
Right.
And yet something about 18 is the very end of an area, at least in our culture, of liberty that we don't really get. We have to face into adult responsibilities, beginning somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So
Has to
somewhere
happen
I think,
sometime.
yeah, yeah, it has to happen sometime. So I do think that's an interesting thing. I think that heaven, we will be pristine in that sense.
Yeah.
There will be tremendous virility, and yet sage wisdom and envision.
Right. Right.
That's an interesting combination because those two are at odds. In
I mean,
in
you're
world.
describing my life right now.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think one of the interesting things when you start talking about heaven is the realization that how we assess life and what is normal.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to end up finding that all our filters were wrong, and we knew it, but we didn't think it through. So we assess life based upon a fallen perspective and a broken perspective.
Sure.
And we look out at the world and think, okay, that out there, I'm looking out the window in your thing here, there's normal out there. None of it's normal.
Right.
None of it is normal. So, for example, think of this in heaven, where our activities go to. What won't be there that is normal for us? Firefighting, police officers, lawyers, medical profession, insurance. Mm-hmm. How many things we do that we call normal and are simply sin corralling parameters? Things that we do to hedge.
So mitigating the brokenness. Yeah.
And we think it's now normal. This is life.
Yeah.
And no, I think we're going to be totally shocked that we have very little understanding. So, yeah.
Okay, so I have a little transition topic.
Go.
I've noticed that a lot of the things that we default to talk about in our, we have this running list of notes for our podcast. It always defaults to politics. And I think that's because the news defaults to politics. And I think the news is running our kind of current thinking a little too much. Not you and me, but just generally.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And
it's a part of materialism. This
it
is all that's real.
Well, and they're selling something, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to buy your attention.
Yeah.
But it keeps me from stopping. So I feel like between social media, which makes you think about nothing, and politics, which makes you worry about things you can't control, that you're sort of bouncing to and fro from the things in the middle that you can actually do something about.
Yeah.
And that matter.
Or thoughts, that could have a greater impact on your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're totally right. So did you get that from all of a sudden we jumped into a tiny thing about heaven?
No.
Oh.
No, I just was
that's
looking down
not
our
our
list
thing.
and I noticed it because last week we talked about the House Speaker vote.
Oh, well.
And what are the things that
Yeah.
they actually wrestled over?
The on-ramps.
I heard this week that now Matt Gaetz, who was sort of the leader of the rebellion, and Speaker McCarthy are friends now. They're speaking highly of each other on different news channels and working. And so something good happened. It made me think of when teenagers get in a fist fight and then afterward they sort of respect each other a little more.
Right.
Right.
What are they? I know that. So there were certain specific things they were fighting for.
Yeah, I got a list. So guaranteed votes on. So this is a list from the New York Post article.
Because guaranteed votes on what?
Well, yeah. So it says a promise for guaranteed votes on pet issues like a balanced budget amendments, term limits, Texas border plan, and an end to all remaining coronavirus mandates and funding. So they're guaranteeing specific votes on issues that they think are really important
now.
Is
the point there that they're on single issues rather than omnibus kind of approaches?
Well, so here's the political game that happens in the House,
exactly.
Right? So now that the House is Republican controlled, but is the only chamber that's Republican controlled, now they can do a bunch of votes that don't matter.
I was just going to say that same thing.
Put them into the we voted for this, but Biden wouldn't let us, right?
Okay.
Or the Democrats stopped us. Whereas when they actually have the power, they vote completely differently.
I know it.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. I question some of these concessions, not that they weren't worth fighting for, but what do they really mean, translate into meaning?
Well, so there's a couple here that I think are really big. So one is that it's a 72-hour window for members to read any new bill before it can be voted on.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So that they're not just pushing it through 4,000-page bills.
We'll have to read it after we vote on it. That's
and
obscene.
Here's the thing I still can't figure out. I don't know that anyone knows who writes the bills.
Yeah.
Or whoever knows isn't willing to say. And that includes members of Congress. They don't know where
their
they come
aides.
from. I think it gets handed to them by
lobbyists
and political action groups. So But at any rate, there's a couple others, single subject bills, more single subject bills.
Which
rather
I
than
also
broad
think is a
omnibus
good thing
bills, that kind of
because
thing.
it's so wrong. You slip in things so that you voted against the funding for our troops. Well, that's because you put in the slaughter of babies in Kentucky,
Right.
right? It's like, oh.
And it's
so
a game
deceptive.
they all play where nobody's accountable for any of their
Yes,
votes.
that's exactly
I had
right.
to vote for it, otherwise we
Yeah.
wouldn't get the
Yeah.
job.
So I like the last two. I thought the first one was gamesmanship, but the last two, that's good.
Yeah. And there's
Right, what else you got?
a promise to refuse any increase in the debt ceiling in the next federal budget agreement. A new committee to investigate the weaponization of the FBI against its political foes. So there's some good stuff there.
Yeah.
Um,
The last was going to happen anyway, but
Yeah, maybe. So the big debate among Republican side, the conservative end of the Republican Party, I would say, is how much are the establishment Republicans pretending to want to make change, but they aren't really. So
Yeah,
what these
yeah,
people were
I
doing, because
agree.
they are definitely on the far conservative side, is saying we're going to exert some leverage toward actually making changes,
Yeah.
changes that matter. So
Yeah.
I would say that if they had not fought or resisted or held back their votes, none of those things
I
would
agree
actually
with you.
happen. So
I agree. Which is interesting. They were basically holding their own party over a shotgun.
yeah, well, and if there had been the red wave that we thought would come, they wouldn't have been able to,
I
and
think
so
there
we would have had
was.
even more
It's-
establishment.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right, you wanted to talk about Biden getting rolled.
Oh yeah, well here's another one of these current political things, right?
Yeah.
So my theory is that when I heard this about all the papers, my radar immediately blipped bogeys coming in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something's not right here. His own attorneys.
So talk about what we're
the
talking
defense. Well, what we're talking about is that classified papers are found in his garage, and they're found at his house, and they're found at the think tank, and I think they've found them at 5 different times now.
about. Yeah.
So and they keep happening. So all this, what that is when the current I'm going to say deep state without trying to defend whether that is or isn't a true thing, but I think that there's something there. But when the current administrative state begins attacking people on the left, something's up because they are a part of the left.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, I think the question marks start flying. What's really going on here? On the surface, so what they're presenting is on the surface as if they've suddenly gotten honest. That's not, I don't believe that.
They've had a change of
there's
heart.
something, yeah, have they had a change of heart? But I don't think anybody believes that. Right away, the right was questioning what was really going on here.
Yeah.
And I think that's true, but I still think the right's getting played. So I think that the options are, if it's not as it seems, what are the options? Number one, they want to get rid of Biden, and people have been talking about that this is a way to get rid of Biden.
Well, and if
I
Biden
think that's
is,
true.
because Biden recently announced that he is going to run again.
Or I thought he was just announcing that he was going to announce.
Well, yeah, or
Did
something.
he actually? Yeah, I saw that.
There's all these unofficial
Yes.
announcements. But what I'm saying is, if he's doing that without permission, where they've sort of made the
Who's
hint,
giving
you
them
need to go
permission
away.
then? Who's the they?
The same people who write the bills.
You think so?
Yeah, which
Okay.
is so.
I think it's a conglomerate of odds that are in a behind the scenes fight. There's no single entity in control in
Well,
this instance.
so here's something I've never thought of until I heard someone recently talk about this. The big Republican push is for term limits, right?
right.
Because then we think we can get these
At least when they
corrupt
can't have the
politicians
power to
out of
make it
power.
work.
And so I heard someone say from our side that that's a terrible idea, because then the only people who have been around and know what's really going on
Are the
are the
lobbyists.
bureaucrats,
Interesting.
the staffers, the people behind the scenes who write the policies, even though they don't write the bills.
Okay, so that's not a bad point. Maybe it's an observation that's legitimate, but is it any worse than it is right now? Because now you have two entities entrenched in power. So the argument would be getting rid of one doesn't help.
Well, but putting the power in tension, creating the conflict that stalls the
Maybe I'll push back on that observation, even though I think it has some merit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's say I'm an entrenched politician and you're a lobbyist, administrative state. What you have over me is this. You're for me, and you'll protect me, and you'll help me stay in power. But if I'm gone in 4 years, I don't care what you think.
right.
And if the next guy's gone in 4 years, he doesn't care what you think. There's not you can't get him anything. So maybe it
So you're
would be an
saying
undermining.
it would undermine their power at getting the votes they want.
That's right.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, what were we talking? Oh, the Biden thing. Yeah, so getting rid of Biden. Oh, and the off. So I just think that that's a partial truth. I think the other partial truth of that is this. I think they lost the issue with Trump getting rid of him via classified documents. It was a crap show. And they lost that. So what they're doing is using a loser hand to, if they'll throw them both away. Well, Biden, because if they can get rid of Biden, they don't want to indict him. But if they cannot indict him and appear generous in doing that and say, well, we're not going to indict Trump either. But they have a losing hand on that from the beginning anyway. Not necessarily from the beginning.
So is this the FBI trying to portray themselves as even?
That's my second point. I think second agenda is DOJ, FBI, we are balanced.
Yeah, very balanced.
We are fair. And then I think the third one where that gets into is this. I think the Republican exploratory things, which I have a negative take on that too, because I think who cares?
What do you mean exploratory?
The commissions, the church commission or whatever they're going to do.
Yeah.
Jim Jordan's going to head it up, right? And everybody on the right, conservatives say, oh, good, Jim Jordan. Well, maybe I like him, but you know what? They didn't do anything from 4 years ago when they had power. Just to explore something doesn't do anything.
But so
it doesn't mean anything.
That is, that's something I was listening to. What was it? Chip Roy was going on about. Maybe it was the omnibus bill, right? And he was railing and railing. Don't vote for it. If you vote for it, but none of them have any proposals to actually change the rules to decrease the corrupt methods. So that's why probably the only thing that's happened that matters is the Matt Gaetz-led Rebel Alliance, because it actually changed some rules. Yeah.
So I think what the aspect of the Biden thing is, and this is where I think those other two are perceived, but the one I haven't read anybody commenting on really, I have just one person, but and that is this is taking over the front. They've taken the establishment, the intelligence community, who I think is behind this.
Yeah.
Because his own lawyers are bringing, it's just weird. The whole thing has been weird.
Right.
Anyway, and did you see where Biden asked some of this was planted? Was this planted? Did you see one of his surrogates? And I thought that was hilarious. And I actually think it's a great question. I think they're feeling like they're getting attacked, blindsided by their own intelligence community.
Well, are they saying, hey, we can use this deep state conspiracy feeling?
I know.
Well.
And that strikes me, that's the fourth point, is the unintended consequences potentially. But anyway, before getting at the third point is, I think the intelligence community, what they just did is they took over the front page of the news. It's like Clinton bombing in wherever he bombed during the Monica Lewinsky scandal.
Oh, to change the story.
Change the narrative. Yeah. And they've done it. They've been successful. Now what is Jordan's committee doing? First thing they just announced, we're investigating Biden and these papers. And to me, that was a successful maneuver because it takes off the other things that were...
Well, so what was the thing that they were going to do? January 6th.
January 6th.
And talk about federal agents involved in the...
But January 6th.
So that's off the
stuff
table.
with social media, the involvement, which is technically...
We're talking like about the Twitter files?
The Twitter, and we know that it's Facebook, and we know that it's Google.
Yeah.
There's just not files about it yet. But the exploration of the government's engagement with private business, which is, by definition, by the way, that is fascism. Forget the charts that we were talking about and whatever. Just look in the definition of the dictionary. It is government and corporate interests aligning against their own community. That's fascism.
Against the people.
Against the people.
Yep.
So I think that has now been pushed off the page.
Us. They're trying to protect us from COVID.
Yeah.
They're trying to protect us from misinformation.
Yeah.
They're not against us. I don't know how you could say that.
Yeah. They're for us in that sense because just like a farmer is for his cattle.
Yeah, that's true.
So my concern is that we're getting rolled here as the right is getting rolled in that because then it brings up the question, what should the right do in this?
Well, so here's one thought, okay, that I just had. Because on one hand, you've got this red meat just handed to you.
That's right.
You can go after your political opponent, but here's the other side of it, and I'm supporting your argument in saying this, is that Biden doesn't actually matter.
I agree with you.
Right?
Completely.
The fact that they can put him in and completely manipulate and control this administration is not
The
run
fact
by
he
him.
did not have to run for election
He's
in
not
2020.
He's not the commander of anything.
That's right.
So therefore, if that's true, then taking him out also doesn't matter,
I know it.
which makes this a total sidetrack from things that do matter.
I think you're exactly onto something. It was another point I was going to make. When I first heard Biden say he was going to announce that if he was going to run or not, my first thought was how disastrous this is for the. But I thought, no, wait a minute, Mike. It's not disastrous. They don't care.
Yeah.
He didn't run the first time.
No.
That's not how they're. So he's a useful idiot, and as long as they're making hay with it, why change horses? You know.
Right.
So I agree with that completely. Now the other point is this: unintended consequences.
Okay.
And this gets us, I think, when you have an OST, what's on second thought, looking behind the matter, what's really going on, what's more deeply involved. Here's what we don't know. When we play this out or game it out, we can only do it at a human level.
Right.
And we're all limited. You know, remember when they were talking about maybe it was Trump playing three-dimensional chess and people were stunned, and I don't think he ever was, personally.
Right.
But it doesn't mean he wasn't playing some level, but nobody is brilliant in this. Everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
Everybody has things because we're limited, fallen, finite human creatures. So here's what's funny. What if the Biden administration decides to go after the DOJ and the FBI?
Right.
They never thought he would do that. To bite the hand that, feeds him, so to speak. That would be funny. What if they joined forces with the right?
Well, so they have
Out of political survival.
Think back to 2020, right? One of the big Black Lives Matter movement talking points was to defund the police.
Right.
And I remember when that was all going down, and I thought, okay, you guys want to defund the police, and now conservatives want to defund the FBI, and one of the predictable outcomes, and now we're seeing it, is that only wealthy people will be protected.
Yeah.
Because
that's
they'll
right.
hire their own security.
That's right.
But
That's
what I could see the Democrats trying to tap into with this is get back in touch with their base's feeling of the police or the man, right, the establishment, because both parties have an anti-establishment
Yes.
lean.
Yeah.
That you have to fire them up when it comes time to vote for president.
Right.
Right. So the big
That would be funny if that happened.
because
It'd
the
be
midterms are now
hilarious.
over, and so it's really
It's
president
all about
time.
Yep.
So now it's time to work the base up, get them afraid and angry.
So the Democrat Party gets anti-FBI, anti-government power and authority to get their base rolling for them.
Yeah.
That
Well,
would be
but-
hilarious.
It would be, I don't know. I think it would be a catastrophe at the same time, in the sense that we're going deeper into total lawlessness,
That I agree with that.
right? And so if a country is totally immoral, in the sense that they feel no obligation to obey laws, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I was thinking about the shoplifting epidemic that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
When a population of people feel no obligation to obey laws, there's nothing police can do.
Yeah, that's right.
And so when there's nothing you can do, you retreat to the people that will back you, which is the wealthy. And now you get a massive lawless population with enclaves of wealthy safety.
Or if you can't retreat to wealthy or you're not inclined to do so, you retreat to militia style self-defense.
Yeah, and that's what the small towns will do.
That's right.
Yeah.
There are still more small towns than there are big cities. There's just more people in the big cities.
Well, of course.
But there's
Yeah.
more small towns. It's interesting. Did you notice Biden brought up F-15s again?
He just wants. Yeah. No, I didn't.
But it-
I don't listen to anything he says.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I just read it in headlines.
Yeah,
It's just interesting. That's where his mind is going, right? That's, to me, those
Yeah.
are windows into backroom conversations.
I wonder if he knows that
He's loose
F-15s are
lips
old.
right now. Yeah, I know, exactly.
They're still the best performing. My understanding is they're still the best performing in an air-to-air dogfight.
in certain situations.
Or an
yeah.
F-16 is actually better.
Yeah.
But
I
the
think
F-22s
that's
are. Yeah.
So when is stuff supposed to make us mad? I see you have getting mad about.
Yeah,
things.
so this was a follow-on from your conversation last week, or our conversation of your topic about the realm of spirits and the overlap between the spiritual, like, forces of evil in the heavenly realm, as the Bible calls it, right, versus the political realm, and how we get worked up about what's the government doing, this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about that, and I remember a story. So one time I was in Hawaii, and I'm swimming in the ocean because I just went there to swim, right? I love swimming. And so I'm in the water all day. My wife is on the beach with her sister, and I'm diving as deep as I can. I'm having a ball, right?
Snorkeling?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and wanting to be deep underwater. Like I love
Okay.
the feeling of being deep down and holding your breath and pushing myself. And so I've been out there for a while, and they'd warned you about sharks. Like, oh, there's sharks, but usually they're not aggressive. You know, if you see a bull shark, you're in trouble. But usually it's a reef shark, and it's not going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, that's fine. And so I'm swimming along, and I suddenly look up instead of down, right? When your back is to the sun and you're looking down to see where you want to go next. I see a movement, and I look up, and right there coming at me is a gigantic shark.
Oh,
right?
no kidding.
And my whole body
Oh, my
reacted in a way that I had no idea what, like, it was shocking to me how afraid and instantaneously I was.
Yeah.
Because the thing was nose toward me, right? Straight at me. And I could see the fins coming out the side, and I looked closer, and it was a turtle.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. And it was just that profile or
So
that front.
you filled in the dots.
I mean, it was instantaneous,
Yeah.
as far as I could tell. And as soon as it was gone, I was like, my heart was thumping, my adrenaline had spiked, right? I could feel it, and I
That's a
knew
great
if
story.
that had been a real shark,
Yeah, yeah.
that it would sense my instinctive fear and know that I was prey.
Yeah, that's
right.
right.
Because
Yeah,
there's actually good evidence that sharks
Yeah.
can feel the nervous system of the animals that are nearby through the water. Okay. So all of my theory about what a shark is and how I should feel about it was out the window because I had a physiological reaction.
Yeah.
All right. So
Stop.
because it was real,
Yeah.
now, politics to us, if you think about the spirit realm versus politics, politics is the real. And we have this theory, and we interact on some kind of mysterious level with the spiritual, but like we're not wrestling with spiritual beings in a tangible way like we do in the political realm. And so I was thinking about this and saying, okay, when we see overt corruption on the political sphere, it works us up into anger and fear and what kind of country are my kids going to have and are we going to end up in a civil war, right? There's some big questions that create that same response because it feels very real. How often or when does our prayer or our ministry to people that we care about, does it engage in that visceral, like, no, this is real? Or do we just hang out in this theory of I know which kind of sharks there are and I know what, I've studied it. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, not yet.
Okay, so what I'm saying is so I've had spiritual encounters with people who were talking in voices that were not their own.
Okay.
And when that happens, I had a physiological reaction
Okay.
to say, oh, this isn't just I read about it
So
in
are
a
you
book
saying
or the Bible.
it felt real then?
It felt real.
Because you had the physiological.
Right. But for you and I both, I think, are people who enjoy the theory of things as much as we do the practice. And so I think, okay, how are we engaging in the spirit world in such a way that it still stays in the theoretical? And what are we called to do as Christians to encounter things that are a little more real? And that's something that I've been studying and thinking about and saying, okay.
So are you talking about what if I said this, tell me if I heard you then, that we believe the spiritual realm is real, but because it doesn't, when we look at this other physical realm and it affects us, how do we engage and act in such a way that the real of the spiritual world also affects us? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So it translates into real because...
Well, or maybe there's another way to think of it is
Yeah.
how were the apostles, let's say, or Jesus, how were they living such that to them, encountering the spiritual realm felt more real?
Right.
So that they would see political things going on and think, that's not really what's going on.
Okay, so let me ask a potential question to that.
Okay.
So you and your story was the physiological response creates a sense of what's real. What
Okay,
if,
yeah.
is there a potential for the answer to lie in this? We have to add to those things that create for us a sense of what's real and move beyond physiological responses.
Mm-hmm.
So so Paul says we don't wrestle with flesh and blood, which is an
Right.
interesting statement because your statement is not untrue what you said earlier.
Yeah.
We wrestle We, in a sense, when we view it physiologically, we don't really wrestle with angels in that way. We wrestle with people
Right.
and political things. And so
Yeah.
you're putting that in the real, by meaning real, our physical sense of it, what we can see, touch, taste, feel kind of thing.
Okay.
What if part of the answer is that there has got to be an expanding of our definition and understanding of what is real and what gets us into that new realm of real?
I think that would work if it was having a real impact. So, like, how much of our efforts in serving God by making disciples or by teaching people has the dramatic impact that, like, the Supreme Court stopping babies from getting murdered by overturning Roe v. Wade. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I do.
Because I think I know pastors love to complain about politics, that people are too engaged in it, and I think they're not wrong all the time about that. But what I'm saying is, I think the reason people turn to it is because, look, we can actually go out and make a tangible difference.
So it seems to me that what I'm suggesting about redefining real is legitimate, but there are still drawbacks to it. Because the reality is we're cut off from the world of spirits. If we're not told about it, we are going to come up with a very strange theory of it, because we do interact. It does interact with us in our lives, but we would have very little to explain it and understand it. So when I was in Hawaii recently...
But culturally, most cultures through history have a very complex understanding of the spiritual world. I feel like our culture has sort of cut it off.
And crazy. So when I'm in Hawaii
Okay.
recently for our 30th anniversary, and we're at the Mount Kailua, whatever, and I read the ancient beliefs about it, and there's a guy here who even translates today in those same beliefs. When the lava spewed up, it was the god, and I forget what goddess, whatever her name is.
yeah.
That was her anger doing such and such and such and such, right?
Yeah.
So, complex, positive word, they have an explanation for spiritual things.
Yeah, but
Complex,
so do we.
crazy, it's not the God
God is
necessarily
angry, and so
spewing
there's a
lava.
flood. Like, how is that? That's not that much different than what we're saying.
Well, if it wasn't written to us in Scripture, we would never have said that God made a flood. We would have just said there was a flood.
Well, I disagree. Like, if you look at historically, how do people react when bad things happen? They explain it by spiritual forces.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay,
we
then-
just don't now
I agree
because
with you.
we've accepted a naturalistic frame as the
But I
dominant
think
frame of Western
what
culture.
you're attaching to in that argument is the something bad happened, and I'm going to need to explain it. And I agree with you on that side.
Because if something bad happens and I can't explain it, then I'm helpless.
But where I differ is, so the ash and the lava, I don't remember what they called it. It was certain, it went into Crazy Town about, it wasn't just a story that the gods are angry and we've done something wrong, but it went into ontological aspects about the rain of fire and what the floating ash meant, and what there was all this extrapolation. Well, it didn't necessarily feel like symbolism. It felt like ontology.
Explain ontology.
Well, the nature of being, the nature of
Okay.
reality. So that the ash and the fire, these were specific aspects of this goddess
Yeah.
and her being and what it meant. So I agree with you that the explanation as bad, attributing to beings, I think that's a good thing
Yeah.
and an understandable thing. And we would have done that with a flood, and we still do if we have a car accident.
Yeah.
People
right.
do it all the time. But that's not the same thing as developing massive stories. So even the pagan stories are rife with this underlying truth and this comic book explanation at the same time.
Right.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying without revelation to tell us some things, that's where we would all go. We sense something, but we don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're painting with our fingers and colors. And that's but we know there's something there. So we would get the main thing right, there's something there, but we wouldn't have a clue what to do with it.
Well, so
So that's why I'm saying we're cut off. We're cut off from the spiritual realm in our fallen state.
Yeah.
And so we know it's there. We've been given some truths about it. So we know more about it than we would on our own.
So when you say cut off, it's almost as if, like if somebody is blind, they have Their
Yes.
body is designed to have this ability
That's
to
right.
see,
That's what I think.
but they can't use it.
That's right.
And
Or
so
it's
we have-
severely limited.
Like we're spiritual beings, but we're severely limited in our senses. So to
That's
speak.
right. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I think.
That makes sense.
From
to
a
me.
positive sense, and even from maybe just an attribute sense. So I mean, I know we're like things like ESP, things like these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
There's very real possibility that they are latent elements that were originally maybe supposed to have been, but now they're just not. They only show up in shards. The mirror's been broken.
So that would confirm. So we're getting a little deep into,
Yeah, we
into
are.
Christianity here, but I think it might be worth explaining. You can tell me later. But that. So I was thinking about what are spiritual gifts, right? And this idea of
Yes, spiritual
you
gifts.
would obtain from God the ability to do this or that thing, right? To speak in a language you never learned, or to know things about someone that you shouldn't know, right? Things that would perceive to be something like psychics or ESP, like you were mentioning.
That would be one realm of them.
So are those gifts like an unlocking? So like if you were blind and were healed, that now you can see. So you always had the eyes, but now they work. Versus like God taking your hands and making you do things like a power that's supernatural the whole way.
That's a good
or is it a
question.
supernatural power that was there that was unlocked?
I think you have to do a little of both, because so the whole thing of you were referencing speaking in tongues, but you can also throw in miracles or
Sure.
discerning spirits or
Yeah.
some of these things that are blatantly supernatural.
Yeah.
And it seems that God gives to individuals an ability that they didn't have before, and it's not a souping up or ramping up of a natural ability.
Right.
It was
it's not like they
inaccessible.
can hear extra well.
That's right. Whereas
So-
other gifts, spiritual gifts like administrations
Yeah.
and helps and mercy, these seems to be things that are in human nature already, but by this newfound Holy Spirit, they're amplified into a way that they were never pursued before.
So, if that were an explanation for how spiritual gifts come about, the reason I was thinking about it is it would sort of make sense of someone who maybe has a gift that seems to be from God but has been corrupted or is using it for corrupt means.
Yes, I think
Because
that's
it's
true.
sort of like the ability's unlocked, and now which way do they go with it?
And that leaves a room for the very nebulous area that these things may be floating around in humanity, and people who are not Christians, they don't have access, but they have access to something.
Yeah.
Now, there's frauds and charlatans, and so when I've talked about this with certain friends, I have friends who want to reject every aspect of this. And all the examples they bring up are the charlatans. It's true, there are
Yeah.
charlatans.
Right.
But I don't think that precludes the idea that there is some legitimate things going on that are wrong, that are distortions. And then I think the other wrinkle that you add to that, getting farther and farther afield, is that the access to these, I think what's prohibited by God when he says don't consort with mediums and witches, don't call upon spirits, is not that the things are wrong events, but that this is the wrong way to seek them now.
Yeah.
Don't be restored to these things through those avenues.
Right.
Those avenues are going to lead you to destruction, even while they appear to be giving you what you kind of feel like should have been yours all along.
Well, and they are giving you insights.
That's right, they are.
They are predicting things that have truth to them
I agree with that.
as they lead you astray.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so the prohibition is not because knowing this or knowing ESP or these things, because those are wrong. It's the pathway of getting to restoring what was original is not the right pathway.
Right.
So I think, anyway, this gets us, we're still back to your getting mad at politics in the realm of spirits. So I wonder, the reason I say all that is because I wonder if part of the response to what you're saying is we have to, it would be a mistake to say that we need to define real just by what our physical senses are.
Well, no, my thinking is that I'll know if I'm fighting the right battle if the spiritual side of things feels as real and impactful in an emotional sense, right? Versus am I just hanging out in theory, which has very little impact on anything. So like everybody can have the right theory and do the wrong thing. So what I'm trying to do is set for myself like a compass that says, okay, what am I actually worked up about? And that'll tell me where I'm fighting. Am I fighting the spirit battle that God's called us to? Or am I just thinking about it, whereas I'm actually fighting and actually care about and get worked up about that vote and how it went, right? Or that corrupt system, in the public schools or something like that.
But see, I think that, so then when you bring in spiritual, you have to bring in, which one are we talking about? The ones, spiritual things that we had no access to before that are surprising, unasked for insights, or the amplification by God of things that are a part of nature. So the reason I think that's important is I think on second thought, OST, on second thought, to me, that is spiritual. Because what it is assuming is that when we see something happening, whether a political realm or cultural realm, whatever, is there more to this than I'm seeing?
Right.
Is there more? Is this just what it seems to be on the surface? Or if I peer more closely, and I think this then gets into the spiritual component, is there something at work here that is not benign? Or is there something that God might be doing here that we don't see on the surface? And the exploration of that, I actually personally think that the exploration of that is its own form of spiritual warfare. The exploration and unveiling what you think you discover.
Well, so that would work in the reverse as well, that if you really believed, not just thought about, that the battle going on below the surface of things is spiritual, then what you see going on the surface would have less impact on you emotionally.
Yes, that's
right?
true.
It would
That's
turn the
true.
shark into a turtle.
That's right. That's right.
So
That's
you would
right.
look at who our governor is or what happened with COVID and say like, well, of course, because
Yeah.
the real battle is underneath.
Yes.
So the fact that
More.
we do get worked up about that,
It shows something's off in us.
right? So
I'll-
that's what I'm
I'll
trying. I'm trying to use
illustrate
my
it.
emotions as a signal.
I'll illustrate it. I remember one day when the COVID was first happening, the COVID.
the COVID,
And
the Rona.
And do you remember when those pictures? Yeah, the Rona. Do you remember when those pictures of Nancy Pelosi came out? She's getting her hair done.
Yeah.
And she didn't have a mask on.
Right.
And the freak out of pointing out of hypocrisy, right?
Yes. The most pointless and enjoyable right-wing
It is.
activity.
It's totally true. Talk about getting mad. What makes you mad, right? and I had this little sense that said two things happened. Number one, she's getting her hair done, for goodness sakes. And she'd probably walking from one room to the another, from a rinse to whatever, or
Right.
something.
Yeah.
It's like, this is stupid to get mad at her for this. Now, is it hypocritical? Of course.
Yeah.
But that's stupid. The second point is this. I found myself getting angry,
Okay.
and I began to realize that I had lost sight of Nancy Pelosi. We'll say her name because we don't know her.
As a person.
As a person, as a real person,
Yeah.
she needs to know who God is herself.
Right.
And I'm a person who's supposed to carry that burden for her because she doesn't carry it for herself. I know she'd be totally offended if she were sitting in the room about her Catholicism and all that.
Deep,
right?
deep and abiding faith. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
But we're just going to not go there. So I realized I'd lost that. And I thought, this is an indication of a problem.
Right.
And it's exactly what you just said. I got caught on the surface of it.
Yeah.
I noticed a little bit, but I've lost the deeper thing because I'm supposed to care about her soul
Yeah.
in a way. I can still be angry about policy she does or disagree or be angry. But if it ever reaches a point where I don't care, I'm so angry with her, and then, okay, let me say this in a way that I will not get thrown in jail for it. You dream about out of your frustration and impotence. You thoughts go through your head that aren't even necessarily your own, but what if something horrible were to happen?
And how
How
much
nice
you
would that be?
Feel gratified?
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was a shocking thing to just see where I really was. And so I think that's an indication of what you're talking about. I did get caught up in the just physicality. I lost sight of the spiritual dynamic of the world.
Right.
And it was evidenced by the fact that I was now, in one sense, I would say, doing a very unchristian thing.
Yeah.
I wasn't just disagreeing with her. I wanted her harm and damage and ruin.
This comes back to that like winsomeness conversation we were having about like the what's the term? The seeker sensitive style of church leadership. And what I see happening with leaders is it erases the idea of the enemy. Where Jesus says, love your enemies.
Wait, say that again. Erases the isolate.
Let me explain.
Okay.
Jesus says, love your enemies. But what happens is we begin to believe we shouldn't have any enemies. And so then we see someone like Nancy Pelosi, whose policies and actions are clearly against us and what we believe. And we can go so far away from what you're saying to feel ashamed of ever even perceiving her as being against us, right?
That we de-enemy her.
And so then we become totally passive in the
Yes,
face
I
of
see what
really
you're saying.
real political
Yes,
actions
you're right.
that we should be
You're
taking.
Right. Yeah.
And so to me,
We
that's
become-
what we were talking about is that like the two sides are getting farther and farther apart. That like the conservatives and the progressive have gotten not just saying I see the world differently, but you're my enemy, right? And so part of that too might be that we forget that we do have a real enemy, and so we substitute
Right.
people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Okay, so you had a thought about something to do with articles about politics that forget God.
Yeah. So when we talk about when do we get mad and when do politics in the realm of spirits, I think this ties into another idea, and that is when we ask what's really going on. Okay, so there's articles and people assess our country. This is what I think. I think that we are in a rapid decline, and who knows when it's going to stop, and who knows where it's going to end up.
I was listening to a sermon from the 90s talking about how we're already in the days of Noah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, little did they know how dark it'll get.
That's another conversation about how we always think it's the worst it's ever been.
Because it's always getting worse. There has to be. That's what the Great Reset is trying to do, right? It's a godless attempt at a great awakening.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
This is basically my point.
Yeah.
All these conservative people that I read what they're saying in their assessments, ones that I really appreciate, Victor David Hanson, and I believe they have Christian roots. Some of them probably are Christians, but here's what I notice. Interestingly, except for sometimes Prager, who is Jewish. He's theistic then.
Yeah.
But what they do when they assess and analyze, they only do it at the human level.
Right.
They never go to spiritual dynamics. And it's like, it's crying out for everything that you said is true, sir, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, your analysis, I think, was excellent. But why do you stop short?
Right.
Why do you not bring in the element of God? Because the reason I think this is significant is, and this gets back to another thing, I think it's the role of reason. This is on my notes for some time and I never have gotten to it.
Yeah.
I think that we expect reason. So I'm thinking of a person right now that I've talked about these kinds of things quite a bit and they get frustrated. I don't understand, It's so crazy. Why would they, or let's say mutilation of children.
Okay.
Or you can list 20 things.
Yeah.
It's absurd what's taking place.
Yeah.
It's absolute insanity. So why does that happen? And I keep telling this person, because it's not based in reason. You keep expecting a reason for it.
Right.
You keep expecting to have point A to be point B, and you say, if they're at point B, how'd they get there from point A? Where's their point A?
Yeah.
That's not the issue.
We're not dealing with a rational situation.
It's not rational.
Yeah.
So that then gets us back to those articles about these conservative authors, great analysis, but they're acting as if it's only rational.
So I listen occasionally to Scott Adams, who's not a Christian by any means,
Yeah.
but he's a conservative-minded person whose specialty is in influence and particularly as a trained hypnotist. And what he talks about is that humans we think of ourselves as rational, and that we make our decisions occasionally from an emotional, instinctive frame, but usually we're rational.
Yeah.
So it's actually the other way around, but we're always rational after the fact. So we rationalize the things we did. That doesn't mean we rationally choose the things we will do. We do things by instinct and emotion, and then we come back to them and say, well, here's why it was the right
Yes,
thing to
I
do.
think that's fair and right. And that tackles in a little bit with Pense's, Pascal. The heart has reasons of which the mind knows nothing. The problem with
It's almost
that,
like we're a three-part being.
it's almost like there's a dimension to us that is not as visible.
That's right.
And I think the dilemma with that, as soon as it's said and as soon as we talk about it, we recognize the truth in it, right?
Okay.
Even this guy who's not a believer recognizes there's another dimension of decision making. But once we get into that arena, we are like lost kids. We turn around looking, we don't know what's going on entirely. It's a little frightening because we're not sure.
Well, but doesn't that take us back to the realm of spirits?
That's exactly where I'm going with
Yeah,
this.
okay.
It gets us into this, and that's what I'm saying. So these articles, they lack this part of an answer.
Yeah.
But without it, they think they're presenting themselves as more reasonable in the functional world.
Right.
But by keeping away this very difficult topic, they're actually unreasoning. They are not mean to, but they're acting as if reason should account for these
Well,
things.
I would say
doesn't.
they're accepting a premise of naturalism, that the spiritual world doesn't
of course,
exist.
and they would tell you they're not naturalists. They
No,
don't
right.
accept it, but they're functioning that way.
That's right. And so when I think often of like the Daily Wire, okay?
Yeah.
So all of their pundits, Matt Walsh, Clavin, Knowles, and Shapiro, those are the big top four,
Yeah.
right? They're all religious people.
Yes, exactly.
Actively pursuing
Exactly,
it. They all
exactly.
will talk about their religious practice on the side, but never use it as a reason for anything in their debates.
Yeah.
And the stated reason I've heard Shapiro talk about it is that you're arguing from an authority
Yeah.
that is not accepted by your opponent.
I can
So
understand
you're
that
not
point.
being persuasive if you say the Bible says
Yeah.
to someone who doesn't believe in the Bible.
Yeah.
But most of what pundits do is not persuasion for the opponent.
Yeah.
Most of what they should be doing is explaining reality to someone who doesn't understand it.
Yeah.
Someone who does come with a religious frame. I think it's hilarious. Prager's the same way, right? He runs an organization as an active Jewish practicer of Judaism. Almost all his employees are born-again Christians because they're hungry for someone to explain the practical world from a spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
But even he writes the Rational Bible.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which I haven't read it. I heard good things. I assume that it's a great book and a series of books.
Yeah.
But it's still trying to rationalize or to naturalize, I would say, naturalize a spiritual phenomena.
Yeah.
And the reason we do that, so here, I was thinking
Yeah,
about
go
this.
ahead. 'Cause
I was talking about this with a
where I
friend.
want to go next.
Because we were talking about this dichotomy that we have this naturalistic frame that's commonly accepted, like the science, right? And science, by definition, is trying to explain things through natural causes. That's the purpose of science. It's not religion, okay? And then on the other side, we have this spiritual dynamic of things going on that we sort of relegate to foolish people. But at the same time, it's not just like poor people. Although it is far more feminine, right? There's more, like if you went to, there was a guy who came to Portland who was like one of these mediums. And he had a TV show for a while, and now he's on tour, making millions, picking people out of the audience and talking to their dead relatives, okay? And so if you went to that audience, it would be 90% women who are hungry for a connection to something more meaningful than a rational, naturalistic explanation of the world. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's wrong in any sense.
Right.
Okay, so what I was thinking is that there's a strategy here that we say the respectable people are naturalistic, and we've convinced religious, like Christians and Jews and others, to accept that frame of debate. But then meanwhile, if we're saying that the world is actually spiritual, the things that are going on are actually spiritual, so now we're sort of disarming ourselves from engaging in that battle because our whole way of thinking is naturalistic. And then what happens then is God, who is spirit, whose angels are sent to serve us and support us, we don't accept that. We don't engage with even his things. It's like we've sort of said there is a Holy Spirit, and that's like the limit of the spiritual experience that most evangelical Christians are sort of acknowledging. So we've disarmed ourselves as an effort to placate our enemies or our opponents in the debates of ideas. Mm-hmm. And in the process, we've lost sight of the actual battle that the Bible says is clearly going on and is behind everything. Mm-hmm. So then we see that battle, the political side or the practical side, and we say we're helpless against it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true and fair, all of that. We've disarmed ourselves as a way of getting along.
Yeah.
I think there's another thing with our enemies, is what you're saying.
Right.
I think we should add to that the same logic we've disarmed ourselves from enabling us to get along with ourselves as well.
Because you have to divide yourself if you're going to say that spirit realm doesn't exist.
That's right. And I think there's a reason we do that. It's not the same reason as with the others, but it's similar. Because what I think the reason is, this gets to the role of reason and faith, and especially with the craziness. I think the reason that what needs to be said is the insanity taking place is not rational. That means there's something else driving it.
Right.
What else is driving it? Well, there are number one, there are other beings that have an agenda of destruction. Number two, we are aligned with that agenda by nature. So what you find, I think, in the book of Romans is an explanation, is that God gave them over to do foolish things, not rational. A part of judgment and a part of fallenness is that without God's kindness to us, we descend into irrational insanity, self-destructive,
Just left to ourselves.
if left to ourselves. Self-destruction even. We will destroy our very selves and think and be proud of it and defend it.
Right.
That's insanity. Well, what we're seeing happening today is insanity things. We are eating ourselves and consuming ourselves. And so I think what we're trying to protect ourselves, using your argument, is what's behind this lack of reason. Our fallenness is destructive. And we are actually out, if possible, to destroy God and each other.
Yeah.
And we don't really want to think that that's true about us. And the naturalists among us in society, they have rejected this whole definition of what sin is and what fallenness is. And it is all just bad training, bad education, bad this and this. And if we can just mend these things, we'll produce nice people.
Yeah.
But what we have as Christians to say is, actually, by ourselves, we're not nice people. We are raging haters
Yeah.
of God and all He's made, including other people, including our own family. And that is, we don't like to feel that even about ourselves. We don't, because as Christians, we actually, a part of what we're saying as Christians is, we're raising our hand and saying, this is me, I need help.
Right.
And so we say that to become a Christian, but then we live, I want to hide that. That's an embarrassing, that's a leprous full of.
Well, and it's even more fearful to say, I need help because I am subject to or tormented by spiritual beings that I don't even see. Right. And so
that
now
would
it's like
be
you're not just
Looney
humiliated, you're
Tunes.
helpless.
That's right.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to feel that way.
Right.
And so,
But the majority of the world, that's how they've been functioning forever.
are you talking about
I'm
like
talking about
the-
spiritual explanations, not just that
Yes.
volcanoes are going off.
So
but why are my
majority-
relatives sick? Why is my crop not coming
majority meaning in history?
in history? Well, the
And
majority
then-
today.
I know, that's what I was just going to get to. Not just history, but if you go around the globe,
Yeah.
still the majority of the world attributes to spiritual entities, spiritual powers, forces, something, the evils of the world.
Yeah.
Except for the modern West.
Correct. Well, and I would say that even the modern West now, behind the scenes, more and more leaders or people in power
I know where you're going.
are
on
pursuing pagan
Yeah.
rituals and
this.
spiritual
Now,
forces.
rather than being a contrary argument that you just said, it's a supplemental argument.
Well, it's when you reject God, you turn to Baal.
That's right.
That's what I'm saying.
And not just when you reject God, but what you find is, I really want Baal.
Yeah,
I really want to destroy.
because I want to be in control.
I want to be in control and
and
power.
Baal says I can do what I want.
And I want to kill you. I want to kill as many of my own cattle as I can, to make, except if I'm going to starve,
Yeah,
because I like killing. I like blood.
yeah, the destruction.
So to me, progressive theism faith, the role of reason. Why are there articles without God? Because there's something not reasonable going on, and we don't want to say it.
Well, and so I would argue the reason we don't want to say it is because it would be embarrassing
I agree.
to admit a spiritual explanation for things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
But what happens then is it leaves those looking for explanations to understand the world. It leaves the people
Oh.
without real
What is the whole
explanations,
thing in
without
maybe Isaiah
being equipped to deal with it.
where there is no vision, the people perish.
Yeah.
They're thirsty. There's no explanation of what's going on. I don't think vision means like a CEO forecasting where we're going to go in
Well, and
2025.
I think what we're describing is our own podcast. Like what we're trying to do
That's
here
right. That's why I call
is
it an
say
OSC.
we're mixing
on
up
second thought.
we're mixing up the spirit and the politics and
That's
the
right.
practical and making something that maybe will help people
We're
see.
trying to look past what we see, look below the surface. Is there anything else going on here? What's really happening here?
Yeah.
And once we do that question, we are transcending like in-depth political analysis. That's not what we're talking about. Though it could involve a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But what it really involves is what are other factors that without which we don't really have a good understanding.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the danger. And that is there's a habit of mind that dysfunctional and manipulative people that I've known fall into. And that is to read and assume the intentions of others without knowing.
Yes.
And so the danger of
Did you say who does this that people know?
people who are dysfunctional and manipulative
Okay.
will say, well, you did that because you're jealous, or you did that
Yeah.
because you really
Yeah.
wanted this
Yeah.
other thing.
Yeah.
And so it's like a mind reading, as if you could,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which obviously isn't a thing. And so I worry when I'm trying to look at and make sense of the world that I'm just doing that and
Yeah.
spiritualizing it. So that's the risk we take, is saying, well, maybe I don't attribute to Nancy Pelosi evil intentions. Right,
So-
but I attribute it to whatever spiritual being that I
Yes.
see behind.
So
standing
that's why
behind
I
her.
think, at least this is what I do. I work from what I think are principles of what Scripture says are true,
Yeah.
and then try to work out from that. So, for example, when we were talking earlier, I keep thinking about the place in Scripture that says that they, knowing God, they deny, they say there is no God.
Mm-hmm.
But everything around them, they look out and they see the world and they know.
Yeah.
They look inside and they know. So what I think all of us are is we are manics. We are split personalities in a sense, not in the therapeutic definition. But so we do this. We know something of truth. And then we also don't know and we deceive ourselves and we're not aware. Both are true. So if you're talking to somebody, on which level do you interact with them? And my conclusion is you do both at the same time. If you interact with them and they say, I don't really know, and you need to explain what's true, there's truth in that because they don't know. At the same time that that's true, they do know.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you interact with them and don't let them off that they know. So let's say you're an atheist and I'm talking to you. You tell me you're an atheist.
Right.
Ricky Gervais, I just watched him and Jerry Seinfeld thing is enjoyable, but he said, I'm an atheist.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you talk with him, it's only polite to interact with him starting there. So this is back to the Shapiro. You're using an authority that they reject and your arguments are things they don't accept.
Right.
That's true, but it's not all that's true.
Right.
Because I think Ricky Gervais does know.
Yeah.
That's also true. Now, if I only interact with him that way,
Somewhere he knows.
Somewhere
in there.
if I only interact based on that presumption, I'm going to end up being insulting to him. Because I've not listened to him. I've not listened. Why doesn't he believe?
Right.
What are his reasons? But if I only interact with that part about why he doesn't believe and what are his reasons, then I reject this. Then I don't interact with it. He does know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you have to do these two things that are not aligned with each other.
Right.
These two realms. And I think that's the dilemma. That's how I interpret what you're saying. We have to work in this tension point of doing different things that if we only do one of them, we're going to end up making big mistakes.
Right.
If you don't only do the other, you end up making big mistakes.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we're at an hour.
Are we at an hour already?
Yeah,
Seriously?
An hour. And so I wanted to just say, if you're still listening, appreciate you guys. If you find what we're doing helpful, please share this out with people that you think would enjoy it. And we will be back. Hopefully, our plan is to do this every week. If you have topics or things you want to hear us talk about, we'd love for that as well. But until next time.
All right.